Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Hold My Drink, where we navigate the news and politics with a chaser of civility. I'm your host, Jen, inviting you to grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and imagine with us how to create a new American identity together.
Well, hello, everyone. It is my distinct honor to interview two people who work very closely together. We're going to learn a little bit more about that. Jennifer Richmond, who is my partner in crime on the Hold My Drink podcast and somebody I work with very closely, and Wink, who I've gotten to know as well, who is really, a really good thinker and partner to Jennifer as well. So I feel like I've gotten to know Wink through Jennifer, and I'm going to look forward to learning more about how they work together and what they're up to, because I know there's a lot. So the question that I want to start with is, how did Jennifer, you, a white woman living in Texas, get to know Wink, a black man living in San Diego? What brought you two together?
Okay, so we'll start at the beginning, right, Wink?
Sure, yes, definitely.
So I guess it was 2018-ish when I decided, I started writing about race issues and just polarization in general, and I figured that if I was going to do that, I needed to become more informed. So the city of Austin had a diversity training, and I went to it. It was a 2-day, like, full on training, and it was a shocker. It was a shock. It was everything that, David, you and I have talked about, just very segregating us by the color of our skin. And I really went there, and this was like kind of what Wink would say, a gap moment for me, because I went there thinking that I was going to learn. I was going to be talking with other people. I was going to be hearing different stories. I was going to learn how to, like, kind of grow in empathy. And it was really a struggle session. It was a struggle session. And
Right.
I really just, I was shocked. So I wrote. So that's what I do. When I get shocked, I write. So I wrote a
Yeah.
piece. Helen Pluckrose at the time was the editor of Ariel magazine, and she published it. And lo and behold, it published, and I get this email from this man named Wingfield Twyman, and
Hmm.
he's like, he tell I think one of the first words that he said was, "I am only one of 40 million Black Americans, so I can only speak for myself. But here's kind of my take on what you said," and that's really how it all started. And we just started corresponding back and forth, these long, very, like, thoughtful conversation and email. He sent me his manuscript of On Twyman Road, which was his book. I'm sure he can tell you a little bit about, of connecting across the color line. And about, I don't know, Wink, probably 3 months into our relationship, in this very extensive, almost daily, like, long form writing back and forth, I said, "I think we've got a book." And I said, "Are you in?" And he was like, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm in." And we've been writing now for about 3 years, right, Wink?
Wow.
Over 30 months.
That's incredible. So Wink, what made you reach out to Jennifer and let her know, express support, if that's the correct word?
Well, I always enjoy good conversation, number one. And number two, I was intrigued and annoyed that she had been seeking good conversation with her diversity training program and got condemnation. That didn't sit well with me, because particularly in times where there's so much division in the public square, I mean, there's a special need and role for people to come together and to have a genuine, honest conversation. Um, Given my life story, and as Jennifer noted, I'm a strong believer in the philosophy that if there are over 40 million Black Americans, there are over 40 million different life stories, experiences, and perspectives. Um, it had been my feeling for some time that the things I knew, my life story, I never saw myself very much in the public discourse. And so I felt that this was a wonderful opportunity to reach out to someone who was in genuine quest for conversation and not condemnation. And so that was kind of what led me to reply to Jennifer. And also the idea that I am a fan of personal genealogy. And 2 years before Jennifer's essay, I had totally broken through in terms of my ancestry. And that caused me to rethink many issues involving family history, personal identity, and a unified concept of American identity. And so I think reading Jennifer's essay on the heels of my own breakthrough in my personal genealogy, it just made a lot of sense. And I remember telling Jennifer that the people who need to be having conversations across the color line are particularly old Americans, because Americans who can trace their ancestry back before 1700 in the States have unique family experiences and memories and histories. And that's going to be a better glue, I think, possibly for honest conversation than with, say, someone who is a recent immigrant from Hong Kong. And I mentioned that because one of my friends is a recent immigrant from Hong Kong, and we have a splendid old great time. But when it comes to issues involving the color line and race, she's not here. You talk about reparations for American slavery, and she just tunes out. The curtain falls across her face. And why not, right? Because she came to the States in search of greater opportunity and upward mobility. The idea that she would possibly have a dog in that fight for events dating back to the 1600s doesn't resonate with her, and I totally get that. So that's why I thought it's old Americans, people who are descendants from this thing we call American slavery, have the most to gain and learn from a conversation about race across the color line. I've said a lot, but let me tell you, I've only said 1/10,000th of what I've said with Jennifer over the past. Am I right, Jennifer?
You guys are going to write a lot of words. By the way, just my wife is from Hong Kong, and I will tell you, she absolutely has an opinion on that. But that's because she's been here a little longer. So
right.
But it's yeah, as you said, everybody's different, right? People from Hong Kong are as well. So that's fascinating. I'm going to come back to how a little later on to how you've gone sort of deeper in your identity and what your study of genealogy produced. But I don't want to go there yet, if that's okay. Jennifer, I did not do Hold My Drink, like the actual drink, which I was completely remiss in. But because I'm not you, I don't start with it. I come at it like after the first set of questions. So Jennifer, what are you drinking? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I have to tell you, I do have a drink. And David, I know you disagree with this, but I had some wine last night, and my stomach's a little rough, and so I am drinking a hard kombucha again, which David tells me that he does. I said this the healthy alcohol, and he questions that. But you know what? If I believe it, maybe it's so. So yes, I've got a grapefruit hibiscus, not very holiday-ish, hard kombucha, trying to heal from my wine.
Good.
That's the way to do it. That's what the doctor says. Wink, what do you got?
I have ginger beer. I love ginger beer. There you go. As Jennifer knows, I have a genetic weakness for sugar, and so I have to. I'm always drawn to things like ginger beer. So it's who I am.
Right. What's the drink that has ginger beer? And I think is it rum? There's a really
Moscow
popular
Mule.
Is it dark and stormy?
Yeah, dark and stormy. Those are similar drinks. Dark and stormy.
That's a popular drink in Bermuda, and I know that because my wife and I honeymooned in Bermuda, and we had many dark and stormies.
I'm going to make one of those when it warms up a little bit. That's great. Well, I just have a Diet Coke, but
that's cool.
But anyway, all right. So you all have written numerous articles together since then. What are some of the topics and themes that you covered? Wink, you want to start?
Oh, sure. There are several themes and topics that we cover. I have approached our conversations with the idea that we should write about life plainly. So from the get-go, I have tried to avoid slogan words, to avoid communicating with use of slogan words. And why do I do that? For two reasons. One, slogan words cannot capture the nuance and complexity of life as is lived every day. So, number one. Number two, slogans, I feel, are many times susceptible to use for reinforcing a certain mindset, a certain worldview. I oppose that. To me, honest conversation is not about upholding some ideological framework. Honest conversation is about knowing the other person as deeply and purely and as authentically as you can. And so these surface features like skin color or eye color or hair color, I think melt away. And to be honest, and I've told Jennifer this, I think that the more we write, the more we come to the bedrock of personality. I truly believe, and I thought this before we started writing, that personality explains so much in society and what we see in terms of outcomes. And that if we spent more time getting to know people as individual personalities and less as avatars for a race or a group, we would dig so much deeper in terms of the authenticity of our conversation. So, but to reflect back, so I don't use slogan words, and I think that was so helpful. In fact, I think Jennifer was surprised. I wasn't surprised, but I think I was surprised. I think Jennifer was surprised that I was so eager to engage her using 300,000 words in the English language and not just 30 slogan words that we all know and recognize. And you discover a whole new universe of communicating when you're really driven by, well, I want to better understand you. You want to better understand me. And I'm not going to worry about the crowd or the Twitter mob or what mom-in-law might say or what mom might say or the daughter might say. You really just write openly and honestly. Now, is it true that I have a Black American experience? Yes, it is. And so I think that in many ways that was quite helpful because, as Jennifer will tell you, her world has been somewhat isolated from the Black American experience. She has a great international, global experience, right? And she has the experience of American slavery in her deep background. But I find that one of the benefits I brought to our conversation was my childhood, having grown up where I did, which was, I was born in Richmond, Virginia. So if you think about it, I was born in ground zero of the Confederacy in 1961. And I thought about this the other day. My first memory was as a 4-year-old in 1965. So by the time I entered school, most of the civil rights legislation and programs and breakthroughs had been done. So in a sense, I'm an excellent template for the full promise of America in a post-civil rights era, if you think about it, right? Because I wasn't born in Berkeley, California. I wasn't born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I knew what it meant to live in the shadow, if you will, of the deepest horrors in our past. But nonetheless, that wasn't my life. My life was public school integration in the late 1960s, a southern suburban integration in public schools in the 1970s, UVA, go Wahoo Wah in the early 80s, Harvard Law School, work in a big deal law firm in Manhattan, and then eventually meeting my wife, who comes from a particular subculture of Black America, and moving out to the West Coast and raising my kids as California. So all of that is to say, I was so eager just to be involved in an authentic, honest conversation, because I never see that so much in the public square. I never see me in the public square. Where are the novels and screenplays for people who were born after the civil rights victories have been won?
Yeah, it's, I have this feeling that those of us who do this work, who sort of push back against ideology, a lot of it is because we have this deep thirst for authenticity
Mm.
with people. We in ourselves as well. We don't like ourselves when we're speaking words that we don't believe. We can't. Some of us can't even do it. Like sometimes I cannot bring myself to do it, and I think like, what's wrong with me for not being able to say these words that I don't believe? And but I think that that it must be that we're looking for others who also want to live honest, open lives as much as we can. And that doesn't mean there aren't some things that we shouldn't be sharing,
Yeah,
at any given moment, but
yeah.
represent our true selves out there.
It's
And I
it's
think
like
that's very powerful.
it's like being gay in the Village in the 1950s in Manhattan, or it's like
Right.
being a dissident in Prague in the 1970s.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
And
know,
yeah,
I was just yeah, it was, with Wink. This is what I think one of the most awesome revelations was. Although we write about race, although our book is about race, although we connected over race very quickly in our conversation, despite that being our topic, that was the least important thing that we discussed. And I think through Wink, I see him. I just, the only way I can see him is Wink. I mean, um, again, we talk about race, we
right,
talk about his experiences and whatnot, and it's just that going to Wink's idea of personality. He's very. When you ask what we write about, and we write about a lot of like personality and how certain, we were talking about this the other day about culture and what exactly is
Mm,
Black culture. Is there such
yeah.
a thing as culture? And then as we were kind of noodling with that, it was like it became I and this is something that we talk about in our book. Is at first I came into our conversation thinking that there was a quote Black culture, because you're told that there is, right? I mean, that's part of the narrative today. And through Wink, I realized that I think that's I don't know that I believe that anymore.
Mm.
I think that we have created a culture that we call Black culture or white culture or whatever. And but I believe that culture is something that and David, I've learned this a lot too in our conversations with everyone that we have. I think that culture is largely created, and you can actually pick and choose culture to a certain extent. And that is something that was very clear to me, or that's something that was revealed in my relationship with Wink. And I think it's something that we struggle with in our book, and one of our major conversations is there such a thing? And if there is, even if there is, if it's something that we've created, are you resigned to the worst or the best aspects of any culture?
Do
So
you believe you were not exposed to the rich nuance and complexity among people who are Black Americans?
absolutely. I
right,
was resigned to, although, I have friends from all different backgrounds, including, Black American friends, of none like Wink, of course. But
I'm unique.
yeah, but I believe that when we talk about Black culture in America today, the way we have created that culture is this by we framed it in this oppressor paradigm. We framed it, and Wink called me out on this right away in our writing. When I would talk about Black culture before we kind of got into where I'm at now, so the book is actually like a part of it is a transition for me. He would push back on me because I always ghettoized Black culture, right? It was the Ta-Nehisi Coates, it was the Nicole Hannah Jones. That was, if there was such a thing, that was my translation of Black culture, because that's how we talk about. And in some ways I think Wink, he's very kind with me, but he pushed back and he pushed back. I mean, I think that I would get under his skin sometimes. He's like, you're like imposing this idea on me,
mm,
of this
right.
ghetto, of this, and he's like, that's not my life experience.
Right. I wonder if white culture is also, in a sense, being reified as well. I mean, look, I've been all over the country. You go to Elkins, West Virginia, and you go to, let's say, upper state New York, and there are there things that bind them as Americans. Sure, are they every bit as different as probably various strands of Black culture? Of course they are. And I think it's important to talk about culture because culture does exist. I mean, there are codes of conduct and ways that groups of people behave together, or where there would be no differences among groups, which we can easily detect. So we have to understand that culture exists, but that doesn't. But we also have to talk about it in complex, nuanced ways. And I think in some ways that's what you're doing here is you're helping broaden our way of thinking about it, and that's really powerful. So you're working on a book you've already mentioned, and I happen to know that. I'm a little jealous, I'll tell you that, but that's okay. I'll get by. I'll be okay. But so you're working on a book. What themes are you really exploring in this book together?
Hmm. Do you want to take that, Jen, or should I?
Why don't you take it, and I'll pick up if I think there's any
Oh,
gaps.
that's right. That's right. Well, the book, which I like a lot, because what the book does is it starts in the year 2019 and brings us to the present. And of course, a lot has happened in the outside world.
Yeah.
We had the George Floyd riots, and we had a number of things. But sometimes the most important things happen at the micro level within your family, within your home. And so one of the things I like about the book is that you see Jen and I grow. You see us grow as parents over the 3 years. In terms of the book itself, it has three parts. So one part talks about this idea of American slavery as it was and as it is. One of my constant refrains has been that, in fact, I wrote something down, if I can take the liberty of quoting this. I was listening to someone the other day on the podcast Trigonometry. You may have heard of that, Constantine and Francis. They were talking to a gentleman. Yeah, a gentleman who had spent some time in Russia. And he talked about how immediate the gulags seemed to everyone. And it occurred to me, there were echoes of what that man said, but in a different context for me. Now, keep in mind, I was born in 1961, Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, until I was the age of, well, actually, until I went off to college. I lived within 2 miles of the Jefferson Davis Highway, which is named for the President of the Confederate States of America. But it occurred to me, if I were to go back home to Chester today, if I were to travel to Chester, Virginia, and ask anyone at the Starbucks, do you have personal experience of American slavery? No one's going to say, oh, yeah, my grandpa's brother was shot, or my grandparents were on the slave plantations, or the overseer wiped out half of my family. You could go around the table at Starbucks in Chester. No one's going to have a story like that in their family background, their very immediate family background. And so I saw how different that is from the reality of what the guest on Trigonometry had encountered in Russia as he talked with people. There really is that immediacy, right, of the horrors. That's just not true in Virginia, Chester, Virginia, or dare I say, the rest of the South or the rest of America. Slavery is something my grandmother's grandfather knew, Daniel Brown. And we talk about him in this first part of the book about American slavery. But Daniel Brown is not someone who comes across as tormented or harmed psychologically by slavery. The opposite. He comes across as our family Twyman is almost a family founder, if you will. I think of John D. Rockefeller Sr. when I think of Daniel Brown, my grandma's grandfather, because he started from nothing and acquired over 500 acres of land in 2 counties after the Civil War. If anyone's going to be traumatized with the lingering effects of American slavery, it would have been my grandmother's grandfather, Daniel Brown, not my niece or nephew in the year 2022. So we talk about that in part 1 of the book. Part 2 of the book, and one reader has said that's the strongest part of the book, is we really nail home this idea that we do a disservice to American history, to Black American history, when we think of it as slavery and lynching and Emmett Till and race riots, we certainly do. I was telling Jennifer as a preface, what I'm going to say, there were no lynchings in Chesterfield County, Virginia. I think there may have been maybe 3,000 or 4,000 over the course of history, but it wasn't like something happening every day in every jurisdiction. So I think we sometimes have a distorted sense of what life lived plainly was. So we need to look at the story of people who were free blacks, who managed to triumph over adversity during the time of slavery. And we look at several examples of people who really nailed home the idea that it's foresight, character, ambition, industry, education, personality that mattered even in the darkest days of American slavery. It wasn't, slavery was there, but it didn't stop people from achieving. It's so ironic that in the year 2022, we would teach Black kids Blackness is oppression, nothing else matters. Part 3 of our book is a delightful part of our book, and I'm eager to hear Jen's reflections on this. As Jen came into our correspondence, she had this notion of, Black culture, Black experience as the oppressed inner city ghetto, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me came to her mind. And I disabused her of that right away, as she mentioned before. But part 3 of the book is a lovely, lovely, lovely account of what life is really like today for a Black family in San Diego. It's not an overseer. It's not a slave owner. It's other issues. For example, Jack and Jill, which I think we will discuss in some detail. It's about, will the daughter get into Yale or not, and her stressing the night before. It's about communications with the lovely wife. Am I truly Archie Bunker or not? When I have, individual thoughts and ideas about race. So chapter 3 is delightful, and then we conclude the book with a series of ideas on how we can, as a community, as a country, have these more genuine, honest conversations in the public square. I've talked too much, but that's kind of my sense of the 3 parts of the book.
Yeah.
Take it away, Jennifer.
Before 1 second, before you do,
Sure.
I also listened to the latest Trigonometry, I think, with John McWhorter, and I've heard McWhorter since his book came out, probably in 5 or 6, 7 different podcasts. But he made a point that I thought also reinforces what we've been saying, which is that let's not forget that 2/3 of the Black community today is not in poverty, that they're actually in the middle class. In fact, it's actually a much smaller percentage that are in poverty. I think it's around 18, 19% who are living below the poverty line. So, but 2/3 live in the middle class today. And that really does paint a very different picture than one thinks. And I think we do a disservice to the community in a way by suggesting that this is a community that's entirely in distress everywhere. I mean, there may be major problems in inner city Chicago, but that is not the majority, or even close to how the overwhelming majority of Blacks live today in America. And I think that's a really important thing for people to realize, and we lose that in this current discourse. So, go ahead.
It forces a quick point. It forces the Black upper middle class American to live in doublethink.
Yes.
It forces you to adopt the slogan words of oppression, eternal oppression, but at the same time stress your application to Harvard Business School or the University of Virginia Equity Scholars Program. So it's terrible if you think about it, because we are most healthy and in most harmony when we live aligned with our life lived plainly. We're not living our lives plainly if we have to live in doublethink.
Yeah, that's a term that Natan Sharansky, the great Soviet Jewish dissident, used in a webinar we just did with him. I've heard him use it before, and he said, listen, if you were in the Soviet Union under communism, You either had to be a dissident, which was very dangerous. You could get killed, you could get jailed,
Yeah.
or you had to be a true believer, and there were not that many of them, or you had to live in a state of doublethink. And his point was, you all do not have to live in doublethink. You might actually lose a job, you might lose a few friends, but you, in a fundamental sense, you don't have to live in doublethink. And if I could do this and be a dissident and put my life on the line, you can exercise the kind of courage that would allow you not to live in doublethink. So anyway, that's another side. So Jen, what's your role in the book? What are the kinds of things that you're sharing that might be a little different than what Wink is sharing?
You know, it kind of changed over time, if you will. So when I reread the book for the gazillionth time,
Yes.
in our editing process, it's actually really fascinating to me. What I see is it's two things. It's Wink's story of agency and family history. He talks about, like he said, part one is we do American slavery as it was and as it is. And let me give a little bit more context to that. So when Wink and I first started writing, when we agreed that we were going to write a book together, he said, I'm not going to write. He had demands for me.
Of course, right. Yes, definitely.
He said, you got to read. He had me read several things. One of the first things he had me read was Our Kind of People. I'm sorry, I'm blanking right now. The author of
By
that,
Lawrence Otis Graham.
Graham.
He was my classmate in law school, class of 19. Well, anyway, yeah.
And then he had me read Thomas Weld's American Slavery as It Is, which was 1,000 accounts, eyewitness accounts. I mean, this was written back down, in the 1800s.
1839.
1839, eyewitness accounts of, I mean, just brutal, stories that, I mean, it just, anyways, so he had me start there. And then for me, it was this struggle with the story that as a white person, I'm being told that I'm the oppressor. And then now, like, really, like, my eyes being open to so much of the brutality that I knew it was there. But when you're reading 1,000 eyewitness accounts, I mean, it's something else, but where we kind of ended up in that chapter was we're reliving it. We're reliving it. And so that's why we name it American Slavery as It Was. Like, okay, here's how it really was. And we're reliving it in the mind today. So, the title is American Slavery as It Was and As It Is, because we continue to insist in this oppressive, oppressor discussion. But I'm going to, one of our biggest disagreements happens in part one. And this was when Wink says to me, and I'm going to get back to answer your question, David, but Wink says to me, can we just come together as old Americans and see our history together as old Americans? And I said, I like your idea, but I think that would be seen as sidestepping history. And Wink, he still says that. He's like, he like picked up on it. He's like, and Wink, I'm gonna let you, like, because this was such a fascinating, I mean, we went over this chapter. I mean, we went over it and we got angry with each other and we fought with each other. And then it was like, I said, look, I like your idea. I'm just saying, in the way we discuss race today, it would be seen as. Would I like to be there? Yes, but I think it would be seen as sidestepping history. And so before I would like Wink to address that and where where that really upset him. But I wanted to go back to your question first, David, the first story was this kind of narrative of American slavery from the stories that Wink had me dive into research. And the second part, which Wink already mentioned, was stories of agency and Black resilience and uplift, because in so much of what we hear today in history is just the negative, right? It's not the uplift, it's not the resiliency. But what I now, to answer your question, as I'm reading it, it's almost Wink in a way, telling his story, and me transitioning from this idea of oppression to one of agency. And at the very end of the book, the last section where Wink is really talking about, like we're talking about now, living life in 2019 and 2022, we kind of end the book with this idea of retiring from race.
Don't give it all away.
I know.
That's the question I was going to ask Wink about his identity journey. So, but let's. I don't know if we're ready for that yet. I want to because that gets into you in a particular sense. Although it sounds like you've both been looking at it. Yeah. So, how has this changed each of you? And I think you're touching on this, but how has the encounter with each other and sort of negotiating the book and negotiating your writing, how has it changed? And I want to put a precursor to that. I guess it's not a precursor anymore because I didn't. But one thing that it strikes me is that I'm probably like both of you. I'm constantly in these sort of battles with very ideological folk who accuse me of all sorts of horrors around race and racism and the rest. And one thing I think that they don't understand is that we are actually deeply interested and enmeshed in the discourse over equality and in the discourse of making America live up to its own ideals. We just don't agree, we just don't start with the same set of assumptions that that they do, and we feel that we're more likely to get to truth, whatever that is, by encountering real people talking about themselves and their experiences and their ideas than we are through this sort of adopted discourse that we might have. So that's why I'm very curious about, and I'll go back to my question, how it is that how that encounter has changed you. Why don't you start, Jennifer?
Well, I mean, for me, it's been everything. I found a friendship and a relationship with Wink that was unexpected. I found an honesty in Wink that I've not had before. And then we're not talking, this is beyond race, just as friends and being able to write and being able, and we've shared, like Wink said, I think over the course of our book, and you see this evolve as well in our book. I mean, our lives have, I mean, he's been with me as my father has struggled with cancer. As both of you know, well, obviously Wink knows this, but David, as you also know, my husband's in law enforcement, so he's been with me as we went through George Floyd, and the just total defund the police and outcry around that. And he's had his own stories, from his end and his family over these issues. And he's someone that I have, when I'm in distress, he's who I write. I mean, so to have that, and then to be, but it's so much more than race, but to be able to talk to him about the racial tension that we're having in America, and to be able to get that honest feedback and not to shy away. In some ways, actually, I'm just thinking about this right now. In some ways, Wink, it's been kind of in a way almost dangerous for me. Because I expect everyone to be like Wink.
And most people are not open-minded or curious or driven by authenticity, or
I think a lot. Well, David and I, because we have this podcast, so we get to have a lot of authentic conversations. But I still feel like in the public square, some of the conversations that you and I, Wink, have had, and it'll be interesting when the book comes out.
As I told you, I give you even money, it'll be ignored and dismissed.
I think we can release this now. We've had the person who will be writing the foreword for the book is Eric Smith, who makes it into our book because he writes about how a lot of Black voices have been erased and replaced. And so Wink is kind of touching on that with the ignored and dismissed. So for me, it's been this again. The book for me it's a journey. I think for Wink, it's his telling of his story. For me, it's the journey of an honest dialogue around something that's been that we are having in America and my growth around that. Um, so that's how it's changed me.
How
So,
about you, Wink?
all right, how it's changed me, changed me. I'm going to try to give a good answer to that, worthy of Jen's response. Changed me. Um, I think at one level, before I get into concrete things, but at one level, I think it's forced me to be more revelatory about things that I have packed away and tried to forget over time. And so Jen knows examples. I'm thinking, for example, of a lovely, tall, red haired, freckled, dimpled basketball player that I knew in junior high and high school, and how prejudice and bigotry played a part in my interaction with her. But those are things I had put away, for 30 or 40 years. So it kind of changed me in that sense. I was kind of forced to unlock the box to things that I had put away. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a healthy thing. Because as Forrest Gump once said, you have to put the past behind you before you can move on. So I think that was important. Um, in terms of more concrete changes for me, I'll list three. Number one, ah, I was so starved to share my frustrations with Jack and Jill. And so I could just unload with with Jennifer for weeks and months. And that felt very good. Now, we have not really discussed what Jack and Jill is. I mean, just suffice to say, it is an elite group of Black moms. And this group was formed in 1938 in Philadelphia. And the aim is to nurture and instill a sense of Black heritage in the children of the Black upper middle class. I am not in Jack and Jill. However, I happen to live amongst four generations of Jack and Jill members. And so that tension was great for me to be able to release with the understanding eye and ear of Jennifer. Because think about that, Jennifer. Really, there's no one else in my inner circle that I've ever shared those thoughts with or that could relate. If I were to try to relate to my lovely wife, well, we know what that would be, right? If I try to relate to my lovely mom-in-law, well, we know where that story goes, right? If I try to relate to my lovely daughter, well, we know how that would end up. So one of the sad consequences, I think, of certain ways of thinking and being in the world is that for the individual nonconformist, it really raises the question, is there a place for the individual in Blackness? I've raised that question with Jennifer before. I'm not sure I know the answer, but if we were to look solely at Jack and Jill, it's hard to conclude the answer is no, there's not really a place. But I don't want to live in a world like that. So that's why, for me, having Jennifer as a correspondent, a pen pal, has been wonderful. It's like having my personal therapist. I had another Yahoo email.
Yeah.
So number two, how has it changed me? Oh, yes, I would not be the same. One day I was working and I came across this stupendous essay in Tablet magazine. It was authored by a writer, a former Soviet immigrant resident named Isabella Tabarovsky. And her essay was titled American Soviet Mentality. And it was stunning to me. It transformed me. She articulated many of the concerns and anxieties I had about the triumph of slogan worlds in the public discourse. And we were so blessed to have her on our podcast. And I've kept in touch with her, and that transformed me. There is so much value to be taken from the experience of people who knew Soviet repression in their young days. Why aren't we listening to people? Why aren't we listening to more people like Isabella, who can warn us of the developing dark clouds ahead? Finally, the third change, and I've touched on this before, just the importance of personality. I kind of knew that coming in, and I feel even more strongly that way. I mean, Jen and I are both intuitive, was it introverted, intuitive feeling types. We only differ on one dimension of the Briggs-Myers
Mhm.
test. But you can see that every time we talk. So it's like two complementary personalities, and you can really dig so deep into things when you complement one another. I think so oftentimes we ignore personality, we create avatars for race, and people just butt heads because they're not engaging or seeing or perceiving the world the same way. When you have two people who pretty much perceive the world the same way, the surface differences melt away. It really
Right.
doesn't matter if Jen is white or I'm black or whatever. What really matters is how are you hardwired to see the world and you're on the sense of a mutual journey, as Jen puts it. And so for me, just being able to be in a community of fellow nonconformists, first Jen, then the folks at Counterweight. Shout out to the nonconformers in Counterweight, to Eric Smith, and to David, and to Isabella, and many more. That for me has been so wonderful. And it's almost like my breakthrough didn't happen because of race. It happened because I was true to myself as a nonconformist who sees the problems in the way we structure and speak.
Yeah,
That's all I gotta
beautiful.
say.
Yes, we all find each other, and it sort of gives us a way of doing what we do because we have other people who experience the world similarly. I'm not the same Myers Briggs type that you are, but however I'm wired to be a nonconformist. That is for sure.
There
I
you
have
go.
so I want to put. I don't think it's really a case study, but something that I'm struggling with, and see how you both answer it, whether you answer it similarly or differently. So I've been struggling with the concept of Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, and all lives matter. I can add that too.
Sure.
Um, on the one hand, when I first heard the term Black Lives Matter, put aside whatever political implications it had, I sort of understood it like, yes, Black lives do matter, and as a literal phrase, Black Lives Matter, right? And and I know from my experience as a Jew that I don't like it when somebody appropriates the Holocaust and uses it to mean something completely different. So when they use a term like concentration camp, which I understand in a very specific way, if they were actually talking about a concentration camp, I might be okay with it. But a lot of times they're not. They're talking about a place where immigrants are living in Texas
Yeah.
or something. It's not a concentration camp. There's nobody. There's no ovens. There's no forced labor. And so I understand why some Black Americans would be very protective of the phrase. On the other hand, I know Jen from our conversations. I think I can say this that you have a Blue Lives Matter. Your husband is in law enforcement, and when I first heard it, I sort of had a reaction to it. Not I wasn't. I was just like, whoa! I had to process it a little bit. And I knew somebody else who had a Blue Lives Matter sign on their yard right at the beginning of the whole post George Floyd eruption in society, and it made me at first I winced a little bit. I was like, because I felt like it was appropriating. But then the more I've seen the plight of police and how that's really shifted in society, I understand why police need something of their own to say, we have rights too. We have an identity. We have an important function in society, and that's now being downplayed. I understand it, but so help me understand how should I regard Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, all lives matter. Maybe I'll start with you, Wink.
Oh, sure. Well, it's interesting because I certainly have lived within the ambit of quote unquote Black Lives Matter. Uh, my children have the mask and the stickers, and someone I know who I will refer to as Shelby has those terms emblazed on her T-shirt. Um, you know, I I remember 3 years ago, one of my sons, we were at the supermarket. He asked me, "Dad, what do you think of Black Lives Matter?" And this is like 2017, 2018. And I said, I kind of find it mildly offensive. And why did I say that? Because, as a kid, who grew up in Chesterfield County, Virginia in the 60s and 70s, everyone in my universe was black. So, of course, Black Lives Matter. It was a given. It's kind of like the sky is blue or water is wet, right? Um, or a beating heart keeps us alive. And because I just took those things as axioms in life, it just seemed mildly off putting to me that someone would reduce that to a slogan for whatever purposes the slogan may be used for. So that was my first reaction to it. I really try not to do slogans, as you can tell, or utilize slogans. So even the idea of having to address this kind of doesn't sit well with me, because I'm always disdainful of people weaponizing slogan words for purposes that I may not agree with. So that's all I'll say about that. In terms of Blue Lives Matter, once again, I don't really like slogan words. I don't find that offensive. Um, I do find offensive people who engage in collective demonization, as Isabella, our friend, talked about in her wonderful essay, I repeat, American Civic Mentality. Her idea is that, collective demonization has invaded American culture and consciousness. And to me, I saw that a few months ago, maybe a year or two ago. Someone I know, we were driving by a Blue Lives Matter rally, and the person I know said in the car, "Those are white supremacists." And I was off of my high talking with Isabella, and I immediately thought, that's wrong. You can't demonize a group of people with a slur or slogan. And so I said, no, you don't know who those people are. And my father-in-law was a New York City police officer. So if anything, I feel a sense of family towards law enforcement officials. But we got into it. I think we got into a heated argument, and we didn't talk to one another for a week, because some slogan word had driven a wedge between us. And so that's why I really don't like slogan words, because they make us dumb, as Isabella has written, and they force theory onto reality. Reality should define theory, not the reverse. So yeah, I mean, there was a better time in the 1990s and 2000s when we just thought in terms of, I think, more so individuals, and people who were policemen were just people, policemen. I'm going to sum up because I could go on forever, but and this is in our book, actually. We talk about this. I once had a relative who I will not name, but I love him. Peace out to you. I have a relative who said to me in a text message, every Black man has some story with the cops. And he was being genuine and authentic, and he sincerely believed that. And because I'm a easygoing, harmonious person, I didn't challenge him. I could have. I didn't. But I do not have a quote unquote police story. We talk about that in our book. The most time I've ever spent with a police officer was an occasion for which I was so grateful, eternally blessed. We were in Mammoth, California, and it was a raging blizzard. And we're you've heard term country bumpkins. We were city bumpkins. We didn't know anything about snow chains, snow tires. So we got stuck on the side of the road. It was like 20 degrees. It's a blizzard. You can't see more than 20 feet in front of you. We were we were stuck. I was trying to put the snow chains on. My hands were freezing. And what did I see? But I saw the angels approaching us. It was a California State Police officer. Nice as nice could be. Hello, you guys, are you having some problems? I said, yes, yes. Help us. I don't know how to put this on the tire. He spent about maybe 10 to 15 minutes helping us put all of our chains on our tires and directing us on the best way to go to get back to the closest hotel in Mammoth. And that was a wonderful encounter, wonderful experience. If that's my only experience with law enforcement, then I say two thumbs up. That's all I gotta say.
Cool. Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, my story is personal already. And again, Wink lived with this, with me in many ways. But when and this is again, I don't want to give way too much because this is actually a story in our book, but the um the Blue Lives Matter. So my husband, well before George Floyd had put up, at being a cop, this is before it even became political. This was actually, I think, under Obama when the 5 cops were killed in Dallas. He put up a flag. We have an American flag out, and so he put it that. So it's been there for, even before Trump came into office. And we don't talk about politics in our books, by the way. That's on the
True,
side.
we do not. That is true. That is true.
Anyways, though, when this happened and the heat was really on, when George Floyd died and the heat was really on towards the police, we got. I mean, there was a time where my husband and I we really disagreed over the flag. I've never. I even suggested that maybe for a minute we take it down. I've never seen a look of betrayal in someone's eyes, and it really just. I mean, because even though I understood, I do think, like, I think, if you were to put up the blue flag as a result of George Floyd, I kind of think that would be in poor taste. But the fact that we had it up all this time, and of course, not a lot of people didn't know that, and they were just paying attention to it now, right? But the fact that I suggested that we take it down, this is a man who his entire life, since he was 18 years old, worked in a city protecting the lives of people who primarily weren't the same color as him. And the sense of betrayal that I saw, it broke my heart. It broke my heart, and it was such a rupture in our relationship. We had to take like a little break. I mean, I went and kind of hung out with some friends for a week just to let it die down. So that's a personal story. And because it's so personal, I have a hard time kind of seeing beyond that. However, I will say again, I think that's where Wink and I are in our book, is like just bringing those kinds of stories and giving them substance. Where when you and I hope what people might take from it is to stop with the assumptions, to stop with the groupthink, to stop with the identification, so that if you were to see that blue line flag, that all of a sudden you assume. I mean, this day and age has become almost like a Confederate flag, right? I mean, I mean,
Right,
it's become that, but that you actually like look beyond that and try to find out who that person is beyond the labels and the stereotypes and the avatars, as Wink likes to say, the caricatures. And yeah, I guess that's been a big part of this journey with me, is like learning to realize that we are so much more than those labels and those slogans. And Wink's already spoken about the slogans. So
Right. Well,
yeah.
thank you for giving me a new way to think about my struggle over this issue. Thank you very much. I'll have to. I'm still processing, but I think that's, yeah. Maybe I don't need to spend so much time thinking about it, because after all, it's all just a slogan.
Mm.
Um, so when's the book come out?
Mm.
Oh, good question.
It's anticipated for October 2022. So we're very excited and grateful. A big shout out to Helen Pluckrose, who is writing the afterword. It's being published by Pitchstone Publishing, who published Cynical Theories. And another big shout out to Eric Smith, as we mentioned, who's writing the forward. So we're still in the copyright, or not copyright, we're copy editing. Sorry, that's the word I wanted. Phase of this, and putting on the final touches. So that's.
Do you want to mention the 2 big names we have for blurbs or not?
Ooh, you
Yeah.
do that. That's exciting. Yeah, this has been such a cool part of the journey too, because I
True.
did not expect. I'll let you tell that story,
Sure.
but Wink reached out to a couple of people and I didn't expect the feedback from the world of psychology. So go Wink.
True. Yeah, I just sent out some letters to people I respected. I have a series of books in my home, and there are some books I particularly like, and so I sent letters out to the authors to see if they might be interested in offering comments in our book or writing a blurb. And I got 2 responses. So we are pleased that the renowned psychology professor, is it Phil Zimbardo, will be offering a blurb. He's very renowned in the world of psychology. He's out of Stanford. And Martin, is it Martin
Seligman.
Yes. He's the leading expert on positive psychology. And we're very pleased about that, because it shows several things. Number one, it shows that we're onto something by reaching out to one another with authenticity. Number two, it shows that there are other people, big names, that see the value of this in the public square. And number three, it also shows that sometimes people can be very excited. One of our people, as Jen knows, was so excited that they kind of jumped the gun and were trying to get us more airplay than we wanted at the time. But we're very pleased. We're very pleased with that.
And we already are planning. We're planning on, in the new year, we're going to start. Because our correspondence lately, or our conversations lately, have been around like the logistical issues of the book. But we're really excited because in 2022 we're going to start writing again. We feel like there's so much more.
Do you want to share the possible topic or not? To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Wink is okay. I'll leave this teaser with you. Wink loves so much of our themes in our book. He loves Star Trek. He is a Trekkie.
I am. Which series do you like?
The original, of course. The original classic. Captain Kirk, Mr.
Do you know
Spock, Dr. McCoy.
He even has a Star Trek, like on Halloween, he's got a Star Trek outfit he has.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
Nice.
So,
I'm the next generation, guys, so what can I say?
I like that too. No question about that. So, yeah. Anyway. But I often think sometimes, we could imagine such a better world back in the 1960s. And isn't it ironic that 60 years into the future we're where we are today? Isn't that ironic in a way?
Yeah, wow. It's really terrific speaking to you both, and I wish you best of luck with the book, and can't wait to get my hands on it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hold My Drink. Like or subscribe to the show and check out the show notes for links to source material and to our website, where you can find what each of us is reading every week, different news with different views. If you have a topic that you would like us to explore, drop us a line. And join us next week as we say, hold my drink, and the conversation gets real.